All, this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So today we have one more rock star with us, and Paul Bork. He is actually a cool bean as well. So Paul, welcome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So, cool beans, what we are going to do today is first I'm going to read you Paul's bio. Then we are going to look at Paul had. So let's read the bio so you can understand why we have Paul here. So Paul is an EndBeen, looking forward to the end of this pandemic from Wuhan, Hubei, China, recovered COVID-19 victim and doubly vaccinated. And I confirmed with Paul his infection was before the vaccine, not planning to get a third vaccine. And that is that, hey, can we get this over with now, this pandemic? Paul is a BS chemical engineering and Six Sigma black belt. So he is a Six Sigma black belt, process focusing on the practical applications of statistics to real world problems. So he is used to looking at data, looking at graphs, looking at trends, making sense of them, seeing how they apply, how do they map to resources, and so on. He's retired. He's a volunteer teaching STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math at local schools. So, with this, Paul, welcome once more.
Thank you, Maureen.
So, the quick context for the Cool Beans. Cool Beans, I had a few days ago, let me share my screen um, at TwoStream. A few days, weeks, maybe even months. A few months ago, I had discussed how Ireland is planning to open up based on the results of the vaccination and the trends. So, in that discussion, I had shared this um, site as well. This is a news article site, so not a technology or science site, but still, over here, there was a graph here that said vaccine uptake and 14 days incidence rate by county in Ireland. The point of this table was that as there is more uptake of vaccination, there is reduced incidence of the COVID infection. So I had shown this data, and we are going to look at that data once more from a Six Sigma point of view, from a resource allocation point of view. Some more references here. This is European Medicine Agency's site for COVID. This is Ireland's dashboard for COVID vaccines. This is Worldometer for Ireland. This particular article that you're seeing maps to September 1 over here. So all of this information is useful as Paul reviews this data. And then this is the Ireland's incidence of infections and the vaccination. So with this, Paul, tell us the, please take it away.
Very good. So one of the things that we do with Six Sigma is we try to get as much information out of the data that we can, and we take a look at it and go forward. And first, I want to emphasize there's nothing wrong with this data. It wasn't miscalculated. It wasn't anything else, but we just take a look at it. And one of the things that I always do is I always graph the data to see how it looks, because if you do a calculation, you don't really know. There's many different things that could give you the same result. And if we take a look and we share my screen here.
So here it is.
Okay, is that luck? Okay, and we have the data coming down by county, and I calculate the scores here. This is just the yeah. So we right here we have the percent uptake and the 14-day incident rate that they reported. Same information that Dr. Mobeen shared. And if we take a look at the graph, we end up with this downward sloping direction, and the data goes down. We get an R squared, which means the data is consistent or correlated. 37% of the decrease in rates is consistent with an increase in vaccination. And if we run in a country, you would say, wow, this is pretty good. You know, if I got 30% of over a third of the decrease in rates can be impacted by the vaccination. This is something that we really need to press and go forward. But again, wanted to take a look and see if there's something else that we can get from this. So if we take a look.
So,
go ahead.
Paul, I'm going to repeat. Imagine I'm your audience as well. You're teaching me as well. So I'm going to reiterate to make sure that are we catching it. So you are presenting that data that I showed before as well in that article. And you're saying that if this data is mapped, there is a downward slope that implies that there may be about 37% improvement or reduction in incidence of the infection because of vaccination.
Right.
Did I catch it correctly so far?
Well, that's the maximum. It correlates. They both change at the same rate. It does not mean causation. It means that correlation is usually the upper bound to causation. Maybe there's something else that is causing it. Maybe one of these counties is more rural and they have a higher vaccination rate, but part of their decrease is due to the fact that they don't have people as close. It could be any number of different things that we wouldn't know. But this sort of is an upper bound and you're sitting there, you're thinking, or at least I would be thinking 37%, that's pretty good for a country. Going across various states, you have different officials enforcing the rules. You have different people giving the vaccination and reporting. 37% is really very, very good. And this vaccination must really be driving a lot of the incident rate going down. And if we put more resources behind it, we will protect people. And if you look at the equation right here, one other thing I'll tell you is about a little less than 40 fewer cases for every increased percent vaccination is what the slope means. So this is what the data looks like if you just go ahead and put it on.
Got it. Couple of things then. So number one, Alquin says, so he's a green belt. That scatter plot looks suspicious. Take out 2 points and the correlation goes weak sauce. So I don't want to steal your thunder yet, but that's an interesting comment. And then there is a comment I just saw from Moorhouse. Moorhouse was saying, is Paul an MD? Moorhouse, no, Paul is a retired chemical engineer, and he is nowadays teaching in various schools as well. And is Mobeen in India? No, I am in California, US. Sorry, back to you, Paul.
Great suggestion. That's exactly what I thought. And if we take these 2 data points that are highlighted in yellow here and exclude them, we will get this graph with the same data. And you notice the correlation goes down to 3% from about 40%, which is exactly what the question was and exactly what I thought. And we go down to roughly 8 fewer cases for every 1% increase. Now, and if we put the 2 graphs together side by side, not saying that this other data is wrong. It certainly is not wrong. The data is all collected. This is correct. But in trying to see how resilient it is, sometimes if you change it a little bit and see how dependent it is on one piece of data or several, if we take those 2 out, the whole slope of the line changes. The correlation coefficient changes dramatically. We lose 10% of the correlation. And so if we take a look at the second graph, it may tell us if I'm running Ireland, maybe I don't put as many resources on the increased vaccination. Maybe I've already reached the point. And if we look at above 85%, we have essentially a flat line. This tells us that there's only a 3% change, or 3.5% change, with the vaccination rate going up to 95% over this distance.
I see.
So again,
so let me
go ahead.
Please complete your thought. My apologies.
I was just saying. So again, this is more of a look at the strength of the conclusions, not whether the first conclusion was wrong, but how reliable it is. And we do that all the time in numbers where you have something that may become very dependent on these 2 counties, and you may want to go back and say, let's check these 2 vaccination rates and see if these are really good data points or not.
Got it. So if I now reflect it back, again, I'm very humbly being your audience because I'm not Six Sigma. I cannot see the stats that way, but I understand what you're saying. In the first graph, the downward slope you're saying is that there are a few robust data points that are pulling it up and creating that slope or contributing primarily towards that slope that shows incidence of infection reducing. In the second graph, if we take out these couple of points which are really contributing a lot, then the remaining counties, regardless of their vaccination status, is not modulating the infection incidence too much. So then the
Right.
question becomes, what are these two counties doing? What is going on there? And secondly, how about the rest of the counties, correct?
Right. Or have we reached, or is this data supporting the idea, just an idea now, not saying it's true, that once you're at 85% vaccination for Ireland with all their rules and all their, society, are you basically at the point where you've gotten all the result that you can out of vaccination? That would be a thought that someone may want to follow up on. And so if you look at this, what we really have is this says we have about 40 counties. Or what this really says is you really have 3 data points. All these other data points are really essentially the same. And so we really have 3 data points that we're trying to draw a conclusion from. And so again,
Right.
this is the looking beyond the initial data, looking beyond a correlation coefficient, trying to see what questions, what things to test. But again, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying Ireland was wrong or the data was wrong. It is fine. And it just is that if we change it a little and these 2 counties changed, it would come down. The other thought might be is, well, rather than saying resources, increasing the vaccination rate at this county, maybe I want to work on these 2 counties. So again, this is simply going and looking at data a little bit more detail, more robust, looking at the strength of the conclusions, not just the conclusions themselves. Did I say that in a way that made sense?
Absolutely, it does make sense.
Yeah,
So
and I have another example for you. If we take a look here at something different, this actually is the weight of a dog over time, okay? And we have a correlation here, and we have this one data point that is low. And this weight was actually taken before the owner had the dog. I know that because I am the owner. So anyway, and if we go to restrict that one data point, if you can see, we're going from here a 92% correlation coefficient to a 97%. And you look at that and say, well, maybe that first data point wasn't right. Maybe their scale was off. Maybe they had the wrong date that they gave me. Maybe the dog was a little more dehydrated. There was something there. You'd ask a question. And it took a little while for us to get together for this thing, for this talk. And so we've had some time, and I have another data point where this time, if I include the initial point, I now get to a 95% correlation coefficient and only 94 if I exclude it. So that's trying to say, oh, my initial thought that first data point might be wrong, it doesn't look as good as it did when I had just the initial data. And then we had another week, and so I got another, got another data point, and again, I go from 95% to 96% including it. So it looks like that first data point that was questionable was a data point that is very consistent and adds to the correlation that we get for the weight of the dog. And so again, if we go back to the Ireland data, when I'm suggesting that it looks like excluding it gets us a better fit, that doesn't mean that it should be excluded. We're just looking at it, and that's an initial thing to look at, to test further and see what happens. Does that make sense, or does anyone have a question about that?
It does make sense. I want to see that graph as well for the Ireland's cases. You had that.
Right. Here is Ireland, starting with where we had the first conclusion and going forward, and the Ireland looks like their incident rates has not come down and has not gone up. I don't know what Ireland has done with their vaccination. I assume that has continued along, and we're not seeing the sort of effect that we would expect with a correlation with 37%. If that's really occurring and our vaccination is going up, we should see a stronger downward slope, I would think.
Got it. There is an interesting comment. Sean says, Irish here. Those erratic counties are next to Northern Ireland, contamination from high rates in NI.
Good. Well, that's a good thing to know.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. So,
But that also supports the idea that just looking at the data, we saw there was something different with these two counties. And we're now hearing from an Ireland native that they believe that these counties are a bit erratic compared to the rest of Ireland.
got it. So, if I can very quickly show uh, Ireland's current worldometer. So this is worldometer. Here is very similar to yours, but I wanted the audience to look at the live chart as well. So this is worldometer's Ireland information. The data point that we had read was from September 1st. At least the article was September 1st. I do not know how much data did they have before, which they presented in there. And since then, this is a 7 days moving average. And so since then, there has not been a lot of change. Now, it could be, Paul, and please correct me, it could be that they could say, hey, the vaccination is what kept it trending downwards and keeping it in control instead of just, going up as it happened over here.
Right. And the other thing is it takes a while after vaccinations before it has an impact on illness. And so what was the vaccination a month ago, 2 weeks ago? Again, I don't know what that is. And if you were running the healthcare for Ireland, you would look at that data. And so all I'm suggesting is that this, to me, looking at it from my perspective, I would raise a question. What's going on with these counties? We got an answer from, hey, they're just weird counties. There's always rural counties or counties that border someplace else that have a different. Or is this really saying that this vaccination conclusion isn't as robust or as strong as it initially looked? And so it's a question. It's not a conclusion.
Got it. I want to quickly look at the death rate as well, because I always feel that death rate is a good reflection of the community's protection compared to just the cases. Cases can occur with vaccination as well. So this is interesting that if I go back up here to the cases, this is a big spike in cases here. And then, so what is this date here? This is January 8, January 10. And then if I go to the death rates, they are, so if you see here, they're peaking in January 22, 30, which is about 30 days after the peak for the cases. And then it slowly declines. And here, if you see, the death rate has really gone down. If I do a 7 days average, death rate has really gone down. So if I go to September 1st here and after, death rate is controlled. So could I say now that vaccination may not have, and again, this is me trying to think about it, not providing a judgment. Is it possible that vaccination didn't have much to reduce the cases, but it looks like it had good impact on reducing the hospitalization or deaths at least?
If I were looking at it from a data standpoint, the death rate is so low, you can't really see a decrease. So whether the death rate is going down or staying the same, all you can say is it's not going up because it's 1 and 0. It's very low.
I understand. So you're saying if you look at it from here almost, May, June, July, August, September, this was already low.
Right.
So saying that September 1's state had something to do with keeping it low, the only thing maybe it didn't let it go up, but generally it's very similar. Actually, if you see here, it's kind of a little bit higher than how it was in June, July.
Yes.
But then there was a peak here as well. This peak
Right.
started in July. So before that, the number of cases were generally low. So because of that, this data shows low death rate as well. Then a peak appeared, which nudged the death rate a little bit higher, but not too much. Am I correct in thinking that way? Paul, you
That's
are
the way
the
I would think as well.
hmm, got it. So then, what would be the conclusion? What would be the summary of the discussion?
I think the summary of the discussion would be to take a close look at the factors to uh, dealing with the incident rate and vaccination, go back to the initial data, uh, and this correlation is correct, but understand that the vast majority of the counties, all but two, are essentially flat. And so when you're trying to draw a conclusion about a downward sloping curve which says vaccination is causing less incidence, you really have three data points. You have the third data point many times, but they're really just the three. And the correlation coefficient here being 3% when we exclude the below 85 says these are all essentially the same. They're not precisely the same, but statistically they're the same. We get a bumping up and down, but we have a 3% change. So
Got it.
when I put this
Got it.
back in with the initial one, I would say that this would if I were running Ireland, but hopefully I'm never running a government, but that I would just question pulling resources from other things that seem to be working and put them on just vaccination. And maybe if we're going to do more vaccination, maybe we look at these two counties first and say, if I can get half the number of vaccination in these two counties versus moving this county a little higher, I might get a better result in the incident rate. But again, these are questions. We can't draw conclusions from just looking at the data.
Got it. Thank you very much. So, Cool Beans, any comments or questions related to this topic from you before we close? So SSK Kaza says, I would like to trust the stats, but as I know of the lack of the reporting in so many countries, is it happening here too?
But I would answer that it doesn't matter as long as they're consistent. Because suppose these numbers that you added 1,000 to the numbers, or you added 20 to the numbers, as long as they're consistent, we're still seeing the same effect. And part of the other thing is if we don't trust the numbers and throw them out, then we have nothing that we can do. So we kind of have to trust the numbers, and as long as they're consistent, we can still draw the correct conclusions, even if we're wrong. Because again, if this line really was up here higher, or if the line was down here because they're over-reporting the cases, we would still have the same conclusions in terms of the effect of the vaccination, which I think is a good idea. And it should cause cases to go down. But just because we think it should doesn't mean we don't look at the data and challenge it and see if it really supports that.
Got it. Loretta says, so we are looking at trends.
Right. Yes. And I also want to say the importance here is not just Ireland. The importance is to take a look at all the data when someone comes and tells you something, whether it's prices for cars or houses or your phone can reach whatever. A lot of this stuff, even if the people are telling the truth with the data, if you take a look at the data closely, you may be able to see, hey, maybe there's another question here. Maybe it isn't. And on the other hand, if all this data was scattered right around, and when I took one or two data points out, it stayed the same, I would say that's very robust data. And it means that conclusion is not supported more statistically, but it is more robust and more reliable because it's not so dependent on one or two things.
Got it. Got it. Thank you very much. I'm just going to see if there is any more questions. There is a nice comment from Al Quinn. A wise person once said, it is better to be consistent than to be correct. And I've never stopped believing this.
I think you're absolutely right. The question is accuracy and precision. They always talk about shooting arrows or something. If you can shoot the arrows and get them within a quarter and you're hitting the wrong target, you can shift the aim very easily. If you're scattering them out so there are no arrows within 5 feet of another one, there's nothing you can do to get better.
Got it. So I think these are the questions. Thank you very much. This is actually fascinating to look at the data from a deeper perspective and guidance by a Six Sigma. I love it. Thank you very much. Any other comments before we beg leave from the KoolBeens? Queen says, shoot first, paint the target after. So, so very good. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much for clarifying some of the data points and the way to think about them. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. And I enjoyed it, and I appreciate your offering to share your time with me.
Thank you very much. And KoolBeens, I would join in a few minutes, and then we'll do a chit chat. Maybe we'll try to go to Odyssey together, but let me come back live on YouTube first. Paul, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.